Gerry Adams was once one of the most notorious men in Britain, the former Sinn Fein leader long accused of IRA membership. But in Dublin's High Court today, a jury decided that the 76-year-old still has a reputation he can successfully defend. In 2016, the BBC's Spotlight programme broadcast an allegation that Adams had sanctioned murder, but the source was anonymous, as were 5 other sources the BBC said corroborated it. The man who was killed was Denis Donaldson, in the beige jacket here, for a quarter of a century, shoulder to shoulder with Gerry Adams in the Irish Republican movement. But in 2006, Donaldson's body was discovered in County Donegal, where he'd been tortured and then shot. At the time, Adams said he was appalled.
Clearly, the people who carried out this killing are enemies of the peace process. They're against change, they're against the type of future which many of us have worked very, very hard to create.
Donaldson's murder came shortly after he had admitted being a British government spy, for decades a traitor to the Irish nationalist cause.
I was recruited in the 1980s after compromising myself during a vulnerable time in my life. Since then I have worked for British intelligence and the RUC PSNI special branch. Over that period I was paid money.
Adams used to carry the coffins at IRA funerals, the BBC's lawyer told the court, trying to persuade the jury that the allegation that he'd ordered murder was sufficiently credible to report, though Adams countered that joining the IRA was never a path he took. Instead, his lawyers cast him as a peacemaker, remembering his role in 1998's Good Friday Agreement, which aimed to end the Troubles. And this morning, Gerry Adams won his libel case. It took the jury less than 7 hours to decide that even though the BBC had broadcast Adams's denial, it had also defamed him, though the damages of £84,000 were half what Adams wanted.
From my perspective, taking this case was about putting manners on the British Broadcasting Corporation. And in my view, it's out of sync in many, many fronts with the Good Friday Agreement. It hasn't caught on to where we are on this island as part of the process, the continuing process of building peace.
The BBC insisted it was entitled to report the allegation after its journalists carried out as much due diligence as they could.
We didn't want to come to court, but it was important that we defend our journalism, and we stand by that decision. The implications of their decision, though, are profound. As our legal team made clear, if the BBC's case cannot be won under existing Irish defamation law, it's hard to see how anyone's could.
The BBC's legal bill is believed to be at least £2.5 million, while Gerry Adams could be seen basking in the glow of victory in an Irish court, where it now seems that an allegation can be tantamount to a statement of fact, and where journalists may find it that much harder to report them.
Well, Mark Devonport was the BBC's Northern Ireland political editor from 2001 to 2020. I spoke to him about this case and asked what he thinks winning this case will do for Gerry Adams' reputation.
Well, I certainly think he'll see this as a victory. He had argued in court that a reputation can change over time, and there was a great deal of emphasis put by his legal team on his reputation in more recent years as a peacemaker. And so he will see himself as having been vindicated by this. And this comes after he won a legal case against the British government in which he was able to show that his internment in the early days of the Troubles had not been carried out in the proper procedure, and he got that knocked away. So this is a second victory for him in a row. I
mean, I suppose, you know, people across Northern Ireland and the Republic will have their own views on Gerry Adams and whether he was a peacemaker or a peace taker, as it was expressed in court. But I mean, a ruling like this goes down in history, doesn't it? This changes history's view of what Gerry Adams was. Well, people will still, I think, continue to, as you say,
come up with their own verdicts. And it was interesting that the judge said that this jury only needed to consider Gerry Adams' reputation as of 2016. It's a bit hard to compartmentalise somebody in that way. And I suspect that many of the victims of the Troubles and their surviving relatives will still hold to their own views. But yeah, he will see this as an important vindication by what was quite a young jury in the Irish Republic. And he will no doubt, see this potentially as a precedent should anybody say anything about him in the future.
Is this a case of just, the BBC made a mess of it and they got something wrong? Or are there more broader concerns about how you put historic allegations to people and give them a chance to reply and put that into the public domain?
What is more general, I suppose, is that all programmes broadcast in the UK will now have to consider the spillover signal, how they can be received in the Irish Republic and how they could potentially be sued in that jurisdiction. And also, I think what will be now up to debate will be the extent to which a reputation can change over time, and whether you can say something about someone because of their activity earlier on in their life, and whether that then becomes impossible to repeat later on if they've engaged in very different kinds of activity.
Do you think it's possible that the error here was an assumption by people that somebody like Gerry Adams didn't have a reputation to lose?
I think that's what's going to feature here in the post-mortem. If somebody was making an allegation as serious as this about you, Christian, or me, they would definitely want to be able to mount a defence and justification to say that they can prove the truth of this matter, instead of which the BBC was mounting a defence of fair and reasonable journalism, basically saying that they'd tried to whatever extent they could to corroborate this, and that if they couldn't corroborate it, that they had at least given Gerry Adams the right of reply and carried his own denial. And that obviously didn't convince the court. I can't imagine those kind of decisions being taken about anybody where there wasn't a big question about whether they had a reputation to defend in the first place.
Look, you've been a journalist in Northern Ireland for a long, long time. You've obviously, you've written about Adams and talked to many people about him. Has this ruling changed the conversation that you can have about Gerry Adams?
I suppose it gives you extra pause for thought about how you tackle Gerry Adams' contribution to the peace process. And now, even as I'm giving my answer to you, I'm parsing my sentences a little bit in order to ensure that I don't fall foul of another jury in the Irish Republic.
Mark Devonport, thank you very much.
Thank you.